To configure DPM for Wake on LAN, there's nothing to configure, but you must make sure that the NIC that DPM uses is the one assigned to the VM kernel vSwitch. You may need to rearrange your NIC so you have one that supports Wake on LAN in the VM kernel vSwitch. Additionally, the switch port that the NIC is connected to must be set to auto-negotiate, as many NICs only support Wake on LAN if they can switch to 100 megabit or less when the host is powered off. Let's now look at a demonstration of checking to see if your VM kernel NICs support Wake on LAN. Okay, well now we're going to check to see if our VM kernel port group on our vSwitch has a NIC that supports Wake on LAN. So to do that, you first select your host. Next, go to Configuration, Network Adapters, and now we want to see which NICs actually support Wake on LAN. And it's usually over to the right, so you can scroll over. You can drag that column over here, make it easier. Now we can see that VMNIC 0 supports it, VMNIC 3 supports it, and VMNIC 1 supports it. Now typically on dual port NICs or quad port NICs, not all of the ports on that NIC support Wake on LAN. Usually it's only one or two. In this case, these dual port NICs, only one of the NICs actually supports Wake on LAN. So now that we know that 1, 0, 1, and 3 support it, we'll go over to our networking. Here's our vSwitch 0, which has our VM kernel port on it. Now the VM kernel port is the one that has to support the Wake on LAN feature. Here we can see that VMNIC 0 is configured to that vSwitch, and as we saw previously, VMNIC 0 supports Wake on LAN. So we're okay there. Now if you had multiple NICs in this vSwitch for redundancy, you would have to make sure that both of the NICs support Wake on LAN, because if only one does, it's not going to be able to work, because if it tries to contact the other NIC that doesn't support Wake on LAN, then you're not going to be able to wake up the server when you need to. So make sure that your vSwitch that has your VM kernel has all the NICs on it to support Wake on LAN. In this case, like I said, it's VMNIC 0, and as we saw over here in network adapters, our VMNIC 0 does support Wake on LAN, so we're okay with that to be able to use that with DPM. Once you have enabled and configured either IPMI, ILO, or Wake on LAN properly, you want to test it first before you enable the feature. To test it, simply select the host in the vSphere client, right-click on it, and select Enter Standby Mode, which will power down the host. You will be prompted if you want to move powered off or suspended VMs to other hosts. Powered on VMs will automatically be migrated using vMotion. If they are not capable of vMotion, they will be powered off. Your host will begin shutting down and should power off after a few minutes. Verify that your host is powered off, then in the vSphere client, right-click on it and select Power On. If the feature is working, the host should power back on automatically. Let's now look at a demonstration of testing the standby and power on features. In the vSphere client, we're going to select our host, right-click on it, select Enter Standby Mode. It's going to prompt us if we want to move powered off and suspended VMs to other hosts in the cluster. You can choose to do this or not. We're going to uncheck that and say yes. The host is entering standby mode, which essentially is just powering itself off. Before it's doing that, it's powering itself off properly. It's disabling HA, moving VMs if it has to, and whatever other tasks it needs to do to shut down properly. This will take a few minutes probably before it's shut down. And now it's going to wait for the host to stop responding. Once the host stops responding, it'll know that it's powered down. Okay, the host has physically powered off. Down in the status here, we can see it says host is in standby mode. Up here, you can see there's a little moon icon on it, which basically means the host is sleeping, which it's really just powered off in standby mode. So now to test the IPMI, ILO, or Wake on LAN, what we need to do is right-click on the host, select the Power On option. Now if it's working properly and configured properly, it's going to power itself back on. Let's try it out. There we go, I just heard the host actually power on. It's now waiting for the host to power on. It'll probably take a few minutes for the host to fully boot, and once it's fully back up you'll see the status of it over here just go back to normal and not disconnected. And you'll also see the tasks down here for exit standby mode complete successfully. Okay, we can see that the host is back. It's now enabling HA on the host again. And once that completes, the host will be back fully up and running and operational. Okay, the task is completed, and it is now successfully exited standby mode. It's fully back up and running. If DRS was enabled and DPM was enabled, the VMs that were moved off of that would automatically move back on. So now that we know that the IPM, ILO, or Wake on LAN, whatever technology that you're using works, we're ready to go ahead and set that up. Once you have verified that the standby and power on feature works properly, you need to enable DPM. To do this, you edit the settings for your cluster, and under DRS category, you select Power Management. You can then select either Off, Manual, or Automatic option for it to operate in. The Manual option will only make recommendations for powering off hosts. The Automatic option will enable vCenter Server to automatically execute power management related recommendations. You can also set a threshold for DPM, as you can with DRS, that would determine how aggressive it gets with powering off hosts. The DRS threshold and the DPM threshold are essentially independent. You can differentiate the aggressiveness of the migration and host power state recommendations they respectively provide. The threshold priority ratings are based on the amount of over or underutilization found in the DRS cluster and the improvement that is expected from the intended host power state change. Priority 1 recommendations are the biggest improvement, and Priority 5 are the least. The threshold range is from conservative, which only applies Priority 1 recommendations, to aggressive, which applies Priority 5 recommendations. If you select host options, you can change settings on individual hosts that have them either use the cluster default, always use manual, always use automatic, or to disable the feature for them by changing the settings in the power management column. Let's now look at a demonstration of enabling DPM on a cluster and setting a threshold in host options. To do that, we're going to select our cluster. We're going to edit the settings for the cluster. Then under DRS, we're going to select Power Management. And here's where you can set the mode that DPM will operate in. Default is off, where vCenter Server will not make any power management recommendations, so essentially DPM is disabled. You can select Manual, where vCenter Server will recommend that you should power off a host and move the VMs, but you have to manually approve that for it actually to happen. Then there's Automatic, where vCenter Server will automatically execute power management related recommendations. Once you select Automatic, you can also select a threshold. That threshold ranges from conservative to aggressive. And if you move the slider around, you'll see it goes from Priority 1 recommendations, where it's actually very conservative, so there has to be a lot of unused capacity and unused resources on your host to actually start powering off hosts, all the way up to Priority 5, where this is the most aggressive, where if vCenter Server finds any unused capacity, it's going to go and shut down hosts, move VMs around to get the most benefits out of it as possible. Now you could set this, it's probably recommended to set this in the middle at first, see how that works for you, and then move it to kind of, see where you're more comfortable with having the spare capacity when you need to power VMs back on, because there is a little bit of delay once it powers a host back on while the host powers up and the VMs get moved back. So whatever works for you, try out in the middle. If you want to go more aggressive, that's where you're going to get your maximum savings. Your power savings is on aggressive, where it's aggressively going to go after hosts that can be powered off, power them off, and leave them off as long as they can to save the most money possible. Now there are also host options, and this is where you can set DPM options on individual hosts. By default, DPM power management is disabled for all hosts, so these hosts aren't part of DPM. They won't get powered off unless you actually enable it. So the options here are disabled, which is the default. Manual, where it is the host will always be manual, regardless of what you have DPM set to, and automatic. So you can basically set this. If you want certain hosts to be manual or disabled, never power off, you can set that here, and that would be the case for that host. So we can set one to manual, one to automatic, and now we have basically, we can configure our host custom configuration. So if there's one that you always want on and you never want to power off, you can do that here. Once you're done setting DPM up, you just click OK. And basically it's saying that one or more hosts in the cluster have never exited from a standby state. So it's basically saying that you didn't test that. They want you to test it first to make sure, absolutely sure, that it's going to work. And you can just say OK for that. And now DPM is enabled for that cluster. Here are some tips and best practices for using DPM. If you're using a monitoring system to monitor that your ESX servers are up or down, it will trigger an alert whenever a host is shut down. Having servers going up and down automatically can generate a lot of confusion and false alarms. In addition, many data centers measure uptime statistics on all the servers. Having hosts go down during periods of inactivity can significantly skew those numbers. If you use DPM, you should consider adjusting your operational procedures to exclude the ESX hosts from monitoring and instead only monitor the VMs. You should also make sure that your data center staff knows that it's okay for hosts to be powering off on their own. This behavior will seem abnormal to most people until they get used to it. Similar to DRS, the DPM feature works best if all hosts are in automatic mode, which gives DPM more flexibility in selecting the host to power on and off. If hosts are in manual DPM mode, then DPM must wait for approval to perform its action, which could limit its effectiveness. DPM is more biased towards hosts in automatic mode than manual mode because of this. Consider using automatic mode whenever possible and disabling DPM on hosts that you do not want to be powered off. Don't be afraid to use DPM. Having servers power off and on automatically requires a lot of trust in the technology, but the technology works, so trust in it, as it can save you significant money. You might be a bit leery at first about trusting servers to power themselves on when needed, but if you give it a try, you will be amazed at the results. To protect against a situation where a host is not powered on when necessary, set an alarm in vCenter Server to be alerted if this happens. You can create a host alarm for the event DRS cannot exit the host out of standby mode, so you can be alerted when this happens so you can take care of the situation. You might be concerned about shortening hard drive lifespans when using DPM if drives are more frequently powered off and back on, but storage experts have confirmed that this is insignificant. DPM is a great green feature that when used can save significant money in power and cooling. Most environments always have periods of low usage on their servers, and DPM allows you to scale your resources to what is required. In this lesson, we have learned how to configure and use DPM so you can turn your data center into a green data center with very little effort. That concludes this lesson on DPM. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.